What happens when corrupt officers pick the wrong man to intimidate? A former Marine shows them the true meaning of discipline and justice. It was a quiet Sunday evening in the small town of Arlington, Mississippi, a place where life seemed to move at a slower pace. But beneath the calm, there were tensions that were rarely spoken of. Nathan Williams, a man in his 40s, was driving home with his 8-year-old nephew Malik after a day of fishing at a nearby lake. Nathan, though a man of few words, had a presence that commanded attention. His years in the Marines had instilled in him a sense of discipline, but that life was behind him now. He preferred focusing on his family and peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the two-lane road, Malik chatted away excitedly in the back seat, holding up the fish they'd caught. Nathan smiled at him in the rear-view mirror, his voice calm and steady as he entertained the boy's excitement. The road was nearly empty except for the occasional truck passing by, and Nathan enjoyed the simplicity of the moment. However, as they crossed a faded sign marking the town's limits, Nathan noticed the flashing red and blue lights of a police car in his rear-view mirror. His stomach tightened. Not out of fear, but because he understood what these lights often represented in this place. He pulled over to the side of the road, telling Malik to stay quiet and calm. The police car stopped behind them, and 2 officers stepped out, one tall and thin, the other shorter and stocky with an air of authority. Nathan kept his hands on the wheel, moving slowly and deliberately. His experience taught him how to handle situations like this. License and registration, the stocky officer demanded, his voice harsh. Nathan, maintaining his composure, handed over his ID and paperwork. "In a hurry, are you?" the tall officer asked as he walked around the car, sizing Nathan up. "No, sir," Nathan replied, his tone calm. "Just heading home." The stocky officer glanced at Nathan's ID, smirking. "Nathan Williams, huh? You sure you belong around here?" Nathan didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure if the officer wanted a response or was simply looking for a reason to escalate the situation. Instead, he met the officer's gaze, his expression unwavering. The officers exchanged a glance that suggested the stop wouldn't be routine. The stocky officer handed Nathan's ID to his partner, who went back to the cruiser to run a check. The silence between Nathan and the remaining officer felt heavy, only broken by the faint sound of the police radio. Malik fidgeted nervously in the back seat, gripping his seat. "Uncle Nathan, are we in trouble?" he whispered. Nathan turned his head slightly, keeping his hands visible. "No, Malik. Just stay quiet, okay?" The officer's eyes shifted to Malik, then back to Nathan. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Fishing," Nathan replied plainly, not offering any more details. The thin officer returned, shaking his head. "Nothing on him," he said, sounding almost disappointed. "Well, isn't that a surprise?" the stocky officer sneered. "Thing is, your brake light's out. You know that." Nathan frowned slightly but kept his tone even. "It was working fine earlier." "Are you sure?" The officer's smirk widened. "You questioning me?" "Not at all, sir," Nathan replied. "Just saying it was fine when I last checked." The officer stepped back. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Nathan, his jaw tightening, complied, carefully stepping out. He didn't want to make things worse, especially with Malik watching. As Nathan stood by the car, the officer glanced at Malik. "Cute kid. Be a shame if he had to see something he shouldn't." Nathan's hands instinctively clenched into fists, but he quickly relaxed them. "There's no need to involve him. We'll decide what needs to happen here." The thin officer shot back, moving toward the passenger side and opening the door, startling Malik. "Step out, kid," the officer said. "No," Nathan said firmly, stepping forward. "He stays in the car. He's just a child." The officers exchanged another glance, their smugness fading slightly. Nathan's calm, commanding tone had caught them off guard. They weren't used to someone standing their ground like this, especially without giving them a reason to escalate. But they weren't ready to back down. The tension thickened as the thin officer slammed the passenger door shut, startling Malik. The stocky officer stepped closer to Nathan, invading his personal space. "You got a problem following orders, Mr. Williams?" Nathan didn't flinch. He stood tall, hands relaxed by his sides, his voice calm but resolute. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to get my nephew home." The stocky officer chuckled darkly. "Trouble? Seems like you don't know who's in charge here." Nathan took a slow breath, thinking through the situation. Malik was watching, and this wasn't just about him anymore. Malik needed to see what strength looked like in the face of injustice. "Let me make it simple for you," the thin officer said, stepping closer. "Move over to the car, hands on the hood. Let's see what you're hiding." Nathan narrowed his eyes but did as instructed, placing his hands on the hood. His mind went back to his training. Stay in control, assess the situation, always stay a step ahead. The pat-down was more invasive than necessary. The thin officer seemed to enjoy slapping Nathan's pockets and pulling out his belongings, tossing them on the hood. "You're awfully quiet," the stocky officer said, leaning in. "That silence guilt?" Nathan turned his head slightly. "It's restraint," he replied calmly. For a moment, the officer's confidence wavered, but he quickly regained it, grabbing Nathan's wallet and flipping through it. "Marine, huh? That's supposed to mean something to me." Nathan didn't respond. He knew that sometimes silence was louder than words. But then, the thin officer went too far. He opened the back door and motioned for Malik to get out. The boy hesitated, trembling as he looked between his uncle and the officer. "Leave him alone," Nathan said sharply, his voice cutting through the officer's act. The thin officer grinned. "What's the matter? You're not in charge here." "I am." His hand hovered near his holster. "You don't want to make this worse for yourself, Marine," the officer warned. "You're on thin ice." Nathan's fists clenched at his sides, his breathing slow and measured. He wasn't scared, he was calculating. Years of discipline had taught him how to manage his emotions, even in moments like this. But when Malik let out a small, frightened sob, something inside Nathan shifted. A quiet line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. Nathan's gaze locked onto Malik, whose trembling lips and tear-filled eyes awakened something deep within him. A protective instinct sharpened by years of service, and a lifetime spent understanding that the world wasn't always fair. Nathan realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about teaching Malik what it meant to stand firm, even when the odds were stacked against you. "Step away from him," Nathan said, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to make both officers pause. There was no shouting, no posturing, just the kind of authority that comes from knowing you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. The wiry officer smirked, though his confidence wavered. "Oh yeah? You gonna show us your Marine tricks? Tough guy." Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, positioning himself squarely between Malik and the officers. His movements were slow and deliberate, each step calculated to avoid escalating the situation, but without backing down. "Malik, stay in the car," Nathan said firmly, his eyes never leaving the officers. The boy hesitated but nodded, retreating into the seat and shutting the door. The stocky officer's hand now openly rested on his holster. "You're real close to resisting, Marine. You want to see how far we can take this?" Nathan tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You've already gone far enough." The silence that followed was intense, the kind that makes even the boldest person second-guess their decisions. The wiry officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner for some kind of signal. Then, in a swift, almost effortless move, Nathan reached out and calmly plucked his wallet from the stocky officer's hand, tossing it onto the hood of his car. The action wasn't aggressive, just precise, enough to make it clear he wasn't playing along anymore. "Let me be clear," Nathan said, his voice steady and controlled. "I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to argue. But I won't let you intimidate a child just to prove your authority." The stocky officer's face reddened, his composure beginning to crack. "You don't give the orders here," he snapped, stepping closer. Nathan didn't budge. His stillness was somehow more powerful than any action he could have taken. His eyes locked onto the officer's, unflinching. "You're right. I don't give orders, but I also don't take them from men who abuse their badges." The wiry cop reached for Nathan's arm, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But Nathan sidestepped the attempt with a fluid grace that left the officer stumbling forward, momentarily losing his balance. Nathan didn't shove him. He just moved calmly and deliberately. The stocky officer grabbed his radio and barked something about backup, but Nathan didn't seem concerned. Instead, he stood tall, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around him. What happened next, however, would shift the entire situation in a way no one expected. As the stocky officer's voice crackled over the radio, calling for backup, Malik, still inside the car, did something that neither the officers nor Nathan had anticipated. With trembling hands, the boy reached for Nathan's phone, which had been thrown onto the hood earlier. He unlocked it. Nathan had taught him how in case of emergencies, and pressed the record button. Holding the phone low, through the crack in the window, he started capturing everything. "Malik," Nathan said softly, a warning in his voice. But it was too late. The wiry cop noticed a movement and stepped toward the car. "What's that kid doing?" he barked, his voice tinged with panic. Nathan stepped in front of him, his broad frame blocking the officer's approach. "He's doing what you're afraid of, making sure the truth gets out." The stocky cop's hand twitched near his holster, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the unfolding situation. "You think you're clever, huh? Think you can outsmart the system?" Nathan's lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement, but of quiet confidence. "I don't need to outsmart the system. I just need to make sure it sees you for who you really are." The wiry cop lunged at Nathan, his movements fueled by frustration more than skill. But Nathan sidestepped again, this time catching the officer's wrist in a firm, controlled grip. He didn't twist or pull. He simply held him steady. "You don't want to do this," Nathan said quietly, his voice calm and steady. The officer froze, his face contorted with a mix of frustration and humiliation. Nathan released his grip, his movements deliberate and measured. "You've already lost control," Nathan continued. "Don't make it worse." Meanwhile, Malik's phone continued to record, capturing every word and every action. The stocky officer shouted into his radio again, but this time, his voice was no longer commanding. It was laced with desperation. He glanced toward the road, hoping to hear the sound of approaching sirens. Nathan's hand hovered near his holster. "You don't want to make this worse for yourself, Marine. You're on thin ice." Nathan clenched his fists, his breath measured. He wasn't scared, but he was calculating. Years of discipline had taught him how to control his emotions, even in moments like this. But when Malik let out a frightened sob, something inside Nathan shifted. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. His eyes locked onto Malik's tear-filled face, igniting a deep protective instinct within him. Nathan knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about showing Malik what it means to stand tall, even when the odds seem overwhelming. "Step away from him," Nathan said, his voice steady. The officers paused, sensing the weight in his words. There was no shouting, just a quiet authority that made them stop and think. The wiry officer smirked, though his confidence wavered. "What are you going to do? Show us your Marine tricks." Nathan didn't respond. He took a step forward, positioning himself between Malik and the officers, his movements controlled. "Malik, stay in the car," Nathan said firmly, never breaking eye contact with the cops. Malik hesitated, then retreated into the car, closing the door. The stocky officer's hand rested openly on his holster. "You're close to resisting, Marine. You really want to go there?" Nathan tilted his head slightly. "You've already gone far enough." The silence that followed was tense. The wiry officer shifted uneasily, glancing at his partner. In a quick motion, Nathan calmly took the wallet from the stocky officer's hand and tossed it onto the car hood. The move wasn't aggressive, just precise and deliberate. "Let me be clear," Nathan said. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to argue. But I won't let you intimidate a child to prove your authority." The stocky officer's face reddened, his composure slipping. "You don't give the orders here," he barked, stepping closer. Nathan remained still, his calmness more powerful than any gesture. "You're right. I don't give orders. But I don't take them from men who misuse their badges." The wiry cop reached for Nathan's arm, but Nathan smoothly sidestepped, causing the officer to stumble. Nathan didn't strike or shove, just moved, his actions controlled. The stocky officer pulled out his radio and barked for backup, but Nathan was unfazed, standing tall, his presence commanding. Suddenly, Malik, still in the car, did something unexpected. With trembling hands, he picked up Nathan's phone from the hood, unlocked it, and started recording. "Malik," Nathan said softly, warning him, but it was too late. The wiry officer noticed and moved toward the car. "What's that kid doing?" Nathan blocked his path. "He's doing what you're scared of, making sure the truth is seen." The stocky officer's hand twitched toward his holster, his confidence unraveling. "You think you're smart? You think you can outsmart the system?" Nathan gave a small, confident smile. "I don't have to outsmart the system. I just need to let the system see you for who you are." The wiry cop lunged at Nathan, but his movements were clumsy, driven by frustration. Nathan sidestepped again, this time catching the officer's wrist in a firm grip. "You don't want to do this." The officer froze, his face contorted in humiliation. Nathan let go, his actions controlled. "You've lost control. Don't make it worse." Meanwhile, Malik's phone kept recording, capturing everything. The stocky officer shouted into his radio again, but his voice lacked the confidence from before. He glanced down the road, hoping for backup that wasn't coming. Nathan raised his hand slightly. "This can end right now. No one needs to get hurt. But if you keep pushing, you'll find out the power you think you doesn't go as far as you believe." The stocky officer's face flushed red with anger, his chest heaving. The wiry officer muttered, "This is going to get us fired." Nathan caught the words and softened slightly. "It's not too late to do the right thing. You can walk away." The sound of distant sirens broke the tense silence, but the dynamic had already shifted. The stocky officer's hand twitched nervously toward his holster, and the wiry cop's eyes darted between Nathan and the approaching lights. Their confidence was unraveling. Nathan remained calm but firm. He glanced at Malik, who was still recording, and gave him a small nod. The boy relaxed slightly but kept recording, his quiet bravery shining in that moment. A patrol car pulled up, its lights flashing. Two younger officers stepped out, their approach cautious. One of them, a black officer with a steady voice, spoke first. "What's going on here?" The stocky cop tried to explain. "We had a situation. This man was resisting." Nathan interrupted, calm but firm. "Or recording." The younger officer looked at Malik, who held up the phone. "Sir, do you have footage?" Nathan nodded toward Malik. "My nephew does. He's been recording since they started targeting him." The wiry cop's face paled. "This is going to ruin us." The younger officers exchanged glances, their expressions serious. "You too. Turn in your badges," the black officer said firmly. The stocky officer began to protest, but the wiry cop shook his head. "Just do it." The scene unfolded quickly after that. The corrupt officers were handcuffed, their protests drowned out by the sound of sirens and the murmurs of bystanders. Nathan stood quietly, his arm around Malik. As the chaos settled, the black officer approached Nathan. "I'm sorry this happened. It shouldn't have." Nathan met his gaze. "It happens too often, but it doesn't have to keep happening." The officer nodded. "We'll make sure the footage goes where it needs to." With that, Nathan and Malik were free to go. But the events of that night left a ripple that would reach far beyond this quiet road. As they drove home, Malik finally spoke. "Uncle Nathan, are you mad?" Nathan glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his voice soft but firm. No, Malik. I'm proud. You did the right thing today. Malik's small smile lit up the dark road ahead. This wasn't just a lesson for Malik. It was a lesson for anyone watching. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet and steady, standing up for what's right even when the world seems against you. If this story moved you, share it. Let it remind us that justice is worth fighting for and that strength isn't about power. It's about doing what's right. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.